All right. Hello, everybody. I've just read, a little while ago, I finished reading this book, Flipnosis, and it's The Art of Split-Second Persuasion, and it's by a guy called Kevin Dutton. Kevin Dutton, I think, has also written a whole bunch of books about psychopaths called things like The Wisdom of Psychopaths, which are pretty good reading, and I think I've read them all. They're somewhere on or in one of my boxes of books in some other house. This book I actually ended up reading again. I've read it a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, and I was actually going into the bookshop and asking them if they had a book called The Art of Split Second Persuasion. They looked it up and said, no, but we've got something called Flipnosis, The Art of Split Second Persuasion. And that's when the penny dropped, and I thought, hang on, I've read this before, about a decade ago, right? The reason I was looking for this book was because I reread Never Split the Difference, which is by Chris Voss, who's an ex-FBI guy. Never Split the Difference, his tagline is talk anybody into doing anything or out of doing anything. He was the lead FBI hostage negotiator for a long time, and that's a brilliant book as well. I should probably have it in this video, but somebody else is reading it at the moment. Excellent book if you haven't read it. I read that book again, and it just got me excited about the whole idea of being able to talk anybody into anything or out of anything. Why? Because wouldn't it be fun? And also because I know people who've committed suicide, and I'd love to have been able to talk them out of that. One of the stories in Never Split the Difference is about a policeman. No, actually, that's in this one. That's in this one. I'll come to that one about the policeman who stops the guy from jumping to his death, and how he does that. Because in this book, Flipnosis, the author Kevin Dutton interviews psychopaths. Not all psychopaths are killers or rapists or murderers, although some of them are. Some of them, a lot of them work in finance. But the skills of a psychopath aren't always used for evil. They just often are. But what's really interesting in this book is this one, is that Kevin Dutton, for people who've never met a person with psychopathic traits, or for people who don't have any psychopathic traits, what these psychopaths can do is quite amazing. Now, sure, you have the evil ones, the really cold ones, who do people like Ted Bundy, etc., etc. But then you have the ones who don't do that, but still have that one thing, split second persuasion, remember it's called. They're just superstars, absolute superstars at persuasion. Now, I think I met a couple of these people. There was one guy who I worked with who could literally talk anybody into anything. I mean, this is a guy who was a salesman on the phone and would make £100,000 a month, in his early 20s, and would. It wasn't unusual for a guy like that to see a girl, think she was pretty, walk up to her, and the next morning you found out they were sleeping together, right? So it's just being able to convince anybody to do anything, which can be very useful, right? What he does in this book is quite fascinating because it interviews some psychopaths, and the way they speak, the way they expose your fears, expose your weaknesses, make you feel unsure of yourself. They break people down psychologically. They're like Japanese jujitsu black belts in psychology. They just get inside a person's head and exploit that person or convince that person. It doesn't have to be exploitation. Let's go back to the scenario of someone who wants to kill themselves. You talk them out of it. That's not exploitation. Or it might be right to die people and all of that. But that's the point I'm getting at. There's some very good examples in this book of people doing incredible persuasion. For example, there's a guy on an airplane whose identity he didn't reveal. He just said it was a famous musician who turned around and said to somebody who was complaining to airline staff, and I think the musician said something like, "Why don't you shut the f up and blah 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 and stop complaining?" And then he turns around and grins and he says, "You feeling better now? I can do a lot more," or something like that. The thing about all these different examples of persuasion that Kevin Dutton comes up with is it forms a model, and you could actually take that model and maybe use it to persuade people, which is, there's the entertainment value and then there's the usefulness value of the book. For people who are more kind of neurological, there's people who like to analyze things and everything. They're usually very, very crap at persuading people. It's the people with the bad ideas who don't seem to think things through, who often seem to be the people who are good at persuading people. It's the people who are cocky, the people who are sure of themselves, confident. Trump's a great example, isn't he? Right? tearing the world to shit. Farage is another example, completely destroying a country, completely fucking over everybody who votes for him, but they don't know it. They think he's the savior. But what they've got is they're convincing. It's a mix of humour, doing the unexpected, perceived self-interest. He calls it the split model, I think. I'd recommend reading the book. It's a few weeks since I read it. And having read it again, because this wasn't the first reading, I've taken some of those techniques and used them, and they worked. And that was really exciting because the techniques in Never Split the Difference, which is the book that prompted me to read this one, they work as well. They work so damn well if you're using them with your children, or partners, or annoying people at the workplace, or belligerent people on the transport system, or people who work in shops. I'm so good at getting discounts now. It's ridiculous. Or just diffusing otherwise scary situations. It's really useful. It's kind of turned me on to the idea of learning as much as I can about it and becoming one of these persuasion superstars. My wife always complains, and so do other friends of mine, that you're so fucking persuasive. And they know they've been persuaded to do stuff by me, or they just can't say no to me. So, but they're still my friends, so it's not necessarily so bad. They think it's just one of the things that I do. It's one of the things that Ness does. And then there are other people I can't seem to persuade like that. So I'd love to be able to be the person who gets their way all the time without resorting to violence or threats, that kind of stuff. It's also how to diffuse situations, how to negotiate well, things like pay rises or better outcomes, or all of those things. If you have used persuasion and you know that it can work and you've become better at it, or you've always been good at it, you have to become almost an evangelicist for the power of persuasion. So apparently I'm quite good at persuasion. I love the idea of it and being better at it. So, and this is a good book about it, and that's why I think everyone should read the book. If they're interested in that, I'll probably read it again. My favourite books on communication. This has got to be one of them. Never Split the Difference is another one of them. How to Know a Person. I can't remember who the author of that is. That's a great one. I read a quote by Ernest Hemingway recently. He was saying that in your darkest hour, you don't need advice. You need someone to just be there and listen to you and let you know that you're not alone. In more beautiful words than that. That wasn't verbatim, right? That was just the essence of the quote. And being a really good listener is really important too. And that's more what How to Know a Person is about. This has been all over the place, this review. I'll look at the book now and try and make it a bit more structured. So let me read you some of the comments on the back of the book. Michael Palin and Terry Jones say Kevin Dutton is not the Messiah, but he's got a whole bunch of stories and parables that shed new light on how we are persuaded. Howard Marks says, so mind-alteringly brilliant, I'm amazed it hasn't been made illegal. New Scientist says, offers some powerful insights into the art and science of getting people to do what you want. You can't fault Dutton's eye for a good story. Andy McNabb, it's an SAS guy, right? Brilliant. Kevin Dutton is simply genius. I now tell his stories as if they were my own. Andy McNabb and Kevin Dutton, I'm sure, have written some books together on the wisdom of psychopaths, for example. I think McNabb scores high on the psychopath scale, measure, whatever it is. A wide-ranging and entertaining tour of the science of persuasion and influence, Sunday Times. I'm not a fan of the Sunday Times. Richard Wiseman, author of 59 Seconds, hugely entertaining and extremely thought-provoking. There are a couple of quizzes to do in here as well. So when you read it, grab a pencil so you can rate yourself on things. There's a great story in here about the author Kevin Dutton had a friend at university who was just an incredible persuader, a good psychopath. And there's a story about when he was being robbed one night. And so he's woken up and he's calmly said, his girlfriend has related this as well, the other guy, his girlfriend. He's calmly said to the guy, I can't see your face now, but I've got a gun pointed at you from under the duvet. And then he finds out the guy's trying to take his laptop. He says, look, I tell you what, I've been in these situations myself, and I know you're not a bad person. You can take the laptop, but let me just download some stuff I need from it first. Oh, I haven't seen your face. Here's a balaclava. He just throws a balaclava and the guy takes it. He ends up taking the guy downstairs, having some beers with him, telling the guy he's a postman, getting him really drunk and saying, listen, I'm a postman. I know when people aren't in. You're a robber. We could get a racket going together and make tons of money. Why don't you give me your number and address? And then, we can make a plan. Guess the guy's number and address, right? Makes him take the laptop. He says, look, we had a deal. And then sends the police around to arrest him and retrieve his... he didn't work as a postman, by the way. He worked in finance. But just to have those kind of balls and that ability to think on your feet and convince people, wouldn't that be great? I think it would be fantastic. I'm looking for other books on persuasion. Not these cheesy, pushy, kind of how to be the world's greatest salesman, the old car salesman who apparently held records. That shit just doesn't fly anymore. That relies on buyer ignorance, and there isn't buyer ignorance anymore. And if you persuade or sell like that, the people have a bad taste left in their mouth and they fucking hate you, right? The traditional pushy sales. What do you think of when I say, salesman? It's probably a scumbag, right? It's not somebody who makes you see that something is good for you. Before I go, let me tell you the story about the guy who's about to jump to suicide, and a policeman comes up, and this is another example of the, it's incongruous, there's a bit of humor, there's some self-interest there, blah, blah, blah. Just persuading people. It's quick, simplistic. The less words you can use, the better. So the cop goes up onto the top of the building. It's freezing cold. It's pouring with rain. He gets there. The guy turns around, looks at him, and he starts slowly taking his jacket off, and he says, "Sorry, I get hot running upstairs. Do you mind if I just take a moment to take my jacket off?" And the guy's like, "Okay." And then he takes off his jacket, he takes everything else, and is standing just in a t-shirt in the lashing rain and wind, and the t-shirt says, "Piss off, I have enough friends already." Gets a laugh from the guy, goes and talks him down. And then there's another case of, I think Dutton's talks at or teaches at Cambridge or something, and he's waiting in a queue there for a taxi because the trains are cancelled. He's waiting in a queue for a taxi to London, or something like that, maybe just to the hospital, right? Anyway, this is the story, and some drunk kid pushes to the front of the queue, and he says, and then there's a guy in front of the author who says to him very politely, "Why are you pushing to the front of the queue?" And he says, "I've just heard that my girlfriend's been involved in a terrible accident, and she's going to surgery, and I have to get to the hospital. What's your excuse?" And the guy replies with, "I'm the surgeon, so let me go first." But just for the entertainment value, the book's worth reading. For the education value, it's brilliant. If you actually take some of the stuff and try and use it, it works. It really bloody works. So I'm going to enjoy my coffee now. I hope you enjoyed the review. Thank you for watching.